In the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful. Distinguished guests, Your Eminence, Father Miguel, distinguished guests who have come from the south of the continent to New Zealand, to the United Kingdom, Morocco, Jordan, Qatar, Italy, who have come to us from different parts of the world, and those who are following us from the live streaming in the live broadcast. May the peace and blessings of God be upon you all. On behalf of the Research Center for Islamic Legislation and Ethics and Qatar College of Islamic Studies and Hamad bin Khalifa University, we would like to welcome you all to this conference, and we wish you a good stay in the state of Qatar. And we wish that this conference is going to be useful to you all. Distinguished guests, a number of instructions that we hope that are going to be useful to you. If you have any questions, comments, our team welcomes you, and also we have a number of volunteers that are going to be ready to answer your questions and queries. This is on the one hand. On the other hand, we have interpreting service. We're going to have a live broadcast of this conference in 3 languages, in the Arabic language, in the English language, and French language. So we have a number of interpreters who are going to conduct this job. So if you would like to follow the different items, the different topics that are going to be discussed in this conference, please feel free to get a headset. So the first channel, channel number 1, is the Arabic channel. Channel number 2 is the English channel. Channel number 3 is the French channel. If you wish to use the WC, it is going to be on the right-hand side of the room, and the ladies' room is on the left-hand side of the conference hall. As for the emergency exits, you can see them in this room and outside the room. Once again, we would like to welcome you, to thank you for attending this conference. We hope that you're going to spend a very pleasant period of time. And now, distinguished guests, I have the pleasure to introduce Sheikh Ahmed Hassan Jama, who is going to start with a blessed recitation of Al-Hashr Surah. Hassan Ahmed Jama, who is an imam of the educational city here in the state of Qatar. Thank you.
I seek refuge in Allah from Satan the accursed. In the name of Allah, the gracious, the merciful. O you who believe, fear Allah, and let every soul look to what it has put forth for tomorrow, and fear Allah. Indeed, Allah is acquainted with what you do. And do not be like those who forgot Allah, so He made them forget themselves. Those are defiantly disobedient. Not equal are the companions and the dwellers of the fire and the dwellers of paradise. the dwellers of paradise, they are the attainers of success. If we had sent down this Quran upon a mountain, you would have seen it humbled and coming apart from the fear of Allah. And these examples we present to the people that perhaps they will give thought. He is Allah. He is Allah, other than whom there is no deity, no God, knower of the unseen and the seen. He is the entirely merciful, the gracious. He is Allah. There is no God except Him, the sovereign, the majestic, the giver of peace, the mighty, the compeller. Glory be to Allah above all what they associate with Him. He is Allah, the Creator, the beginner of all creation, the fashioner. To Him belongs all the best names. Whatever is in the heavens and the earth is exalting Him, and He is the exalted in might. He is the wise. Allah has revealed the truth. That was a rough interpretation of the meanings of the verses of the Holy Quran.
True is the word of God.
Glory be to Allah who taught man. Now we move on to the first part of this 5th International Conference for CILE with an opening remarks by the Deputy Director of the Center, Sheikh Shawqi Al-Azhar. You have the floor. I seek refuge in Allah from Satan the accursed. In the name of Allah, the gracious, the merciful. May the peace of Allah and His blessings be on Prophet Muhammad, his household, and his companions. Dear guests, ladies and gentlemen, may the peace of Allah be upon you all. I'm glad to welcome you all on behalf of CILE to this 5th International Conference. The geopolitical events witnessed by the world in the last decades and what has accompanied it of violence and terrorism has stirred a lot of controversy and brought about changes at many layers and levels. Indeed, it has undermined some foundational principles of democratic societies to the point that they have to re-identify themselves now. So, the politics now of fighting terrorism limits and curtails the freedoms and casts doubts on the possibility of diversity and coexistence and being different and the intellectual and religious differences. And indeed, that has strengthened the non-democratic regimes in justifying their escalation of violence and having hegemony over the ordinary citizens. And for the political discourse and the media discourse, both played a vital role in all that, where they both were used to exaggerate the threat of terrorism and spreading fear in order to justify the manipulation of public politics. And they both were indeed used to form the concepts and the ideology in order to gain public opinion, and among them the concept of resistance and terrorism and resistance and just war and jihad, etc., of so many concepts. The terrorism is a vague concept that cannot be identified, but it is used loosely to delegitimize the practices of the other side or the foe as illegitimate behavior or unethical behavior. So everyone who wants to reform the current regime or resist the colonial powers is subject to be accused of terrorism, irrespective of the legitimacy of his action or the lack thereof from a perspective of ethics and humanities. The concept of jihad has become nowadays in the mind of the collective mind as a holy war launched against the other who is a non-Muslim, even though jihad in Islam is a mean to bring about the noble of goals. And Al-Quran has commanded jihad before it allowed resistance that is armed by a very long time. So in the Quran of the Makki era, Allah has said, struggle and carry out jihad as best as you can. And Allah said, those who struggled and made jihad for our cause, we will guide them. And those who make jihad, they make jihad for their own selves. And Allah said, make jihad against them with it. All those verses are to show the ethical jihad and spiritual and intellectual jihad in order to obtain a noble goal, which is resisting all factors that prevent people of entering into peace with each other and with the surroundings. And then the permission was granted with armed resistance. Allah said, those who have been fought are allowed now to fight back, and Allah is able to give them support. Those who were expelled from their home just because they say our Lord is Allah, and had it not been for people stopping each other from violence, then you would have seen synagogues, mosques, and churches and temples being destroyed, and also then the earth would have been corrupt. But Allah has a great bounty over the universe. So the goal of jihad with all its peaceful and armed forms is one goal, which is resisting the impediments that are ethical and intellectual and material that prevent the achievement of the humanity of mankind. So its goal is reform, not vested interest, and life, not death, and building, not destruction, and coexistence, not hatred, and peace, not war. And when the Quran commanded jihad before it allowed fighting, it points to the difference between jihad with its comprehensive meaning and fighting with its narrow meaning, because fighting is something that everybody can do, whether he is following his whims or not. However, jihad, it doesn't come about except by struggling to get rid of anything that undermines the humanity and dignity, and entering into peace with oneself and others and the surroundings. If this condition is not fulfilled, then it is not jihad, it is just mere fighting and combat. The goal of jihad is an ethical and humanitarian purpose to free man from the whims and encouraging man to give aid to the vulnerable ones. And its goal is not to be subjugated to one's whims and desires, as it is the case in most wars. And that takes us to the understanding of peace and justice. If the goal of jihad, which is a noble goal, which is entering into peace and realizing the humanity of mankind, then that means that it is impossible that peace will exist without justice, because peace, or the state of peace with oppression and despotism, is not real peace according to the standards of Islam, because peace is reconciliation and being in harmony with oneself and others and the surroundings. And that doesn't come about when there is oppression and injustice. Al-Quran says, "O you who believe, enter in Islam or all forms of peace all together, and do not follow the footsteps of Satan." That is peace in Islam with all its dimension. You have to enter into it. And this is a way of not following the steps of Satan. All that shows that the issue of concepts is a central theme that should be investigated according to ethical terms of reference and humanitarian terms of reference, and questioning the political motives that give way sometimes to misuse of those concepts. And from this point of view, we are holding this 5th CILE conference under the theme, which is to discuss the critical understanding of jihad and just war, conflict and resistance ethics. So we ask Allah to make our efforts purely for His sake, and the last thing we say is all praises due to Allah, Lord of the worlds. Thank you.
We would like to thank Sheikh Shawqi Al-Hazar for this very interesting intervention. Distinguished guests, I would like to present to you one of the fruits of this center. Those who have benefited, learned from this center a great deal. This fruit has become a tree, very fruitful, deeply rooted tree for the future. Would like to give the floor to the representative of CILE alumni, Idrissi. The floor is yours.
Bismillah.
In the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful.
The audience here in Doha and all those listening via live streaming all over the world. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Here we are celebrating the first birthday of CILE Alumni Network's official launching. While most of our association's members are attending the event via live streaming, I greet them all from this platform. Many members are present here, and I would like to ask them all to stand up. Thank you. Three years ago, in 2014, CILE hosted its first summer school, bringing together participants from diverse backgrounds and cultures in the beautiful city of Granada to deepen their understandings of Islamic ethics. While attending the summer school, intensive lectures by eminent scholars triggered vigorous discussions. These engagements resulted in the birth of an international network of individuals committed to addressing contemporary challenges through critical thinking anchored in deep spirituality. CILE Alumni Network, CAN, aims at creating a global organization of individuals to support CILE's activities, develop and spread the message of Islamic ethics, and amplify it globally. Currently, participants from all 3 years of the summer schools are working together, and CAN is a growing family. Its members caring and supporting each other in the spirit of Islamic brotherhood and sisterhood. We are building a community of committed activists who give of their knowledge, skills, and time for the education, development, mentoring, and spiritual growth of members of the network. We believe that through our activities, we can contribute to a revival of Islamic values that are deeply rooted in justice, peace, and dignity. Our community is built on the Quranic principles of enjoining each other to goodness and preventing each other from evil, يأمرون بالمعروف وينهون عن المنكر, helping one another in righteousness and piety, تعاونوا على البر والتقوى, encouraging one another to the truth and to perseverance, تواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر, to come to know and understand each other, لتعارفوا. Whilst CILE Center contributes to provide ethical framework to address contemporary challenges using a methodological approach, CAN aims at delivering the academic outputs of the center to the grassroots level globally. These objectives are being implemented through various means, such as local chapters which help initiate dialogue and reflection within their communities, transnational research groups in alignment with CILE's areas of research, continuous academic training, and spiritual development. Since the start of CAN, we have conducted many activities, such as contributing to the organization of an Islamic ethics seminar in Germany, hosting meetings for CAN members in different cities, starting focused research groups, leading book study groups where a number of books related to Islamic ethics and CILE's work are discussed and debated, launching local chapters in France, while the chapters of UK, Morocco, and Doha are in progress, coordinating webinars with scholars and experts, producing content for CAN websites, organizing community building meetings and spiritual retreats, assisting CILE with their activities. In light of the theme of this year's conference, CAN is committed to furthering the discourse of principled resistance in order to create peace rooted in justice. We believe that CAN is uniquely suited to do so. We are a group of such diverse individuals from different countries who bring a wealth of knowledge, ideas, and experience in a challenging, violence and conflict historical era. We are able to disseminate this message of Islamic ethics based on peace and justice into our local communities. Internally, we aim to nurture mutual respect and acceptance of our diversity and to promote coexistence. Through our study groups, discussion sessions, public events, and research inquiries, CAN is able to foster dialogue on this important issue of conflict and resistance ethics, and to implement strategies for change by cultivating our leadership skills, which equip us with the confidence to engage on this topic in our societies and to serve for the greater good. It is imperative that Muslims and people of other faiths join hands in building a harmonious world. And in order to do so, there must be people on the ground that are committed to this message and actively involved in building these societies. The vision and mission of CAN is to provide the space for such individuals to engage in critical reflection and to gain the knowledge basis and training to become ambassadors of peace and justice. We welcome agents of change who share our vision and passion to join us in participating and contributing to the movement of thought. CAN's journey aims to become one of love, peace, and justice. If you are interested to embark on this journey, please visit our website, kylealumni.com. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
Thank you very much. And now, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, distinguished guests, the time has come to start our keynote speech session. In this regard, I would like to call upon Professor Ahmaduddin Shaheen, Bishop Ángel, and Professor Tariq to come to the stage. It's with great pleasure that I would like to briefly introduce Professor Ahmaduddin Shaheen, as he will be the moderator of this session, and then he will, in turn, introduce the speakers. Of course, you have with you in the booklet the bios of our distinguished speakers, including the moderator, but it's with great pleasure I would like to introduce Professor Imaduddin Shaheen in brief. He is a professor of political science and international relations. He is the dean of the faculty, the College of Islamic Studies in Hamad bin Khalifa University. In brief, I would like to introduce him in my way, that he is a strong and kind leader. He is a learned scholar, but humble. Professor Imaduddin, the floor is yours. Please, thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Fathi. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
May the peace of Allah be upon you all. All praises due to Allah. May the peace and blessings of Allah be on Prophet Muhammad, his household, and his companions.
This important event, the 5th International Conference of the Center for Islamic Legislation and Ethics, CILE. My name is Ahmad Shaheen, and as Dean, I'm the moderator of this session, and as Dean of the College of Islamic Studies, it gives me great pleasure to welcome all of you to this session. And we are indeed honored to have with us this evening His Excellency Bishop Miguel Ángel Guixot, and I'm delighted to welcome him to our university. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation and for participating in this event. Bishop Guixot, of course, will give the keynote speaker, and our second keynote speaker is Professor Tariq Ramadan, who's known to all of you. And as Dr. Fathi has said, the bios, the detailed bios are in the booklet, so I don't really take much of their time and your time for the introductions. I was asked to give some opening remarks about this opening session and also to cover some of the main themes of the conference. But allow me first to extend my deep thanks to the organizers of this conference, very important conference, the Center for Islamic Legislation and Ethics and its director, Dr. Tariq Ramadan, its deputy director, Mr. Shawqi Al-Azhar, and Dr. Fathi Ahmed, the coordinator of research at the center. I wish also to thank everyone who has put effort and time to make this event happen this evening. Of course, the choice of the conference theme cannot be more pertinent. Conflict and resistance, jihad and just war. How can we look into such controversial issues that easily lend themselves to potentially skewed judgments and politically manipulated positions? How can we address the issue without falling into polemics, self-incrimination, or self-gratification and delusion? The common perception is that secular ideologies, nationalism, or liberalism are rational and tolerant. Christianity is the religion of peace and love, and perhaps rightly so. And Islam is the religion of the sword, violence, and jihad. Jihad, jihadism, and jihadists are the new green pearl that is causing global conflict and threatening world peace. Not ultra-nationalism and populism. Not occupation or consistent denial of the right of peoples to dignity and self-determination. Our region is viewed as the most conflict-prone and the largest source of terrorism, though statistically it is not the case. I will show you very quickly 2 slides. The first one is about the conflict by regions, the intensity of conflicts or armed conflict by region over the past 70 years. Of course, the common belief is, or perception would be, that the Middle East should rank first among all regions in terms of conflict. As a matter of fact, it ranks 3rd. And the top the top region in terms of occurrence and intensity of conflicts over the past 70 years is Asia. The second one is Africa. The third is the Middle East. Even when it comes to terrorism, which of course the region is notorious for, wrongly so of course, the top most attacked countries and territories from 1970 to 2001, which of course is a clear demarcation line, and from 2001 to 2008, the top has not been the Middle East. From 1970 to 2001, the top countries are Colombia, Peru, El Salvador, Latin American countries, Northern Ireland, India, Spain, Turkey, Chile, Sri Lanka, Philippines. Out of this list, the top 10, only one country is Middle Eastern country for the past maybe 40 or 30 years. After 2001, of course, the scale has tipped and the Middle East started, or some countries in the Middle East started to occupy a high-ranking position in terms of the frequency of terrorist attacks. But if you take the two obvious cases, Iraq and Afghanistan, out, we go back to the regular and normal pattern of non-Middle Eastern countries topping the countries with the most terrorist attacks in the world. Now, if we turn to the question of what is the nature of source and impact of conflicts and wars in the region, in our region, in the Islamic world or in the Middle East in particular, I have always claimed that the most transformative, the strongest transformist factor in the region, if we are seeking to look for patterns that move things in the region, actually there are two very strong patterns. One is wars, and the second one is ideas. These are the catalysts behind changes in the region. And this is not an endorsement of wars, but actually this is an alarm or a signal of our role as intellectuals, as peace-loving people, that we should take care in terms of dealing with wars or a phenomenon that takes place in terms of frequency of recurrence at really a very fast pace. Just if we look at from 1945 onwards, World War II onwards, and the impact, the transformative, and the key word here actually is transformative impact of wars in the region. I will just start with World War I, 1990, and of course 1919, and that's over 100 years. Of course, that ushered in the collapse of the old order, transnational order, and the beginning of a new, completely, the establishment of a completely new order in the region, the order of the nation state, actually, or some people call it the Arab system, the new Arab system. I would like to call it actually a system of Arab states that lacked order. In fact, it lacked order for the past 60 or 70 years. If you look at World War II also had a very formative impact in the region in terms of the social changes, and also the emergence of new classes that later on led the region. So the social changes, for example, we're talking about the fruition of financial, newly formed, foreign-inspired, imported financial institutions, new legal systems, also foreign-inspired and imported, and new educational institutions that created a schism or a deep duality within the Arab mind and the Muslim mentality, between the old and the new, and the inability to bridge the two because of structural changes that have been taking place. The same thing about 1948, the collapse of old social classes, aristocratic elitist classes, and the emergence of middle classes, professional classes, that later on actually led revolutions and military coups and took over power and inflicted changes, deep changes over the past 60 or 70 years. 1967, also another turning point and another transformative factor that led to the demise of what at that time was called progressive ideologies, pan-Arabist and pan-nationalist, and the emergence of Islamic revival. 1973, of course, war marked the integration, the full integration or the beginning of the integration of the Middle East into the world economy and the beginning of dependency and the reassertion of Western and international hegemony over the region. Now, are all these wars religious in essence? It's a very important question because this is exactly what we are discussing. And this is what most of the themes of the conference will try to prove. The issue is not to prove whether the wars are, or Islam can provide some kind of a justification for just war or not. Actually, the issue is what, in my mind, what are all these wars about? Even the sectarian wars, if you look at these wars, none of them actually was religious. Even the sectarian wars. Even the sectarian wars, starting with the Lebanese Seven War and ending with the Iraqi, Syrian, and Yemeni wars. Most of these are proxy wars that are a reflection of power structure, power struggle, and a manifestation of a regional actors trying actually to use strategic assets, whatever strategic asset they have, in order to defend their own national interests. None of them, I claim, are actually sectarian or religious in nature. What we have is actually a collapse of a nation-state model, integrative model that can encompass or envelop all of these, the different social forces, and the lack also of a political formula that can reconcile differences in society. Now, just to conclude and to turn the floor to our main speakers, I don't want really to take much of their time. If you look at to examine the nature of conflicts, the ongoing conflicts and wars in the region, I think we are faced with a number of facts, 5 or 6 clear facts, and that's where our role should focus on. One, of course, is that the Arab societies and Muslim societies, but I focus on Arab societies, have become increasingly and inherently, intrinsically pluralistic in dynamics, in structures, and in nature. And it is very difficult for one side, one sect, one political party, one ideology, one faction, one military institution, whatever, to eliminate the other institutions and the other parts. The other fact, this is really a fact on the ground that even if you try to undo it, it's not going to help. It will just protract conflicts and prolong conflicts and not resolve them. The second fact that we have to deal with when we talk about conflicts and wars is that existing authoritarian structures are unable to contain this pluralism and manage existing differences, particularly after the Arab Spring. And that's, I think, why you see this adamant resistance to change on the part of some regional powers and their rejection of popular uprisings and calls for true emancipation from authoritarian regimes. A third fact is that the formula of autocratic and authoritarian nation states can no longer sustain without massive human and societal toll. I will repeat this because this is very important. It seems to be overlooked fact that the authoritarian and autocratic state cannot sustain without actually inflicting a massive human capital, human losses and economic losses. And this is what you see in most of the authoritarian countries that are trying to cling to power, especially, of course, the case of Syria and also the case of the old regime in Yemen and so on and so forth. The fourth fact also that we have to deal with when we look into conflicts is that the changes that will result from the current conflicts and wars in the regions are by no means simple. We're not talking about a simple reconciliation after a period of armed conflict and then we can maintain the old structures of society. This cannot be sustained. Actually, what we are going to witness, and if you take, for example, 1916 or 1919 as some kind of a possible analogy, what we are going to witness actually is a collapse of the Arab or the system of Arab states, the current system of the Arab states, and the beginning of a new one. That leads us to the fifth fact, is that the nature of that system, of that new system, is uncertain and unknown. We are not sure about what kind of new order we are going to have following the resolution of these, hopefully the resolution of these conflicts, because there is a tension, there is a pull that's trying to take the region into actually opposite directions, sectarianism or primordial solidarities and old affiliations, very old affiliations, tribal, regional, sectarian, and so on. Finally, our role as intellectuals is very important in this, because we as intellectuals can help positively and proactively in directing this kind of direction of conflicts and wars and the results and consequences of these conflicts and wars. And it's up to us to find a formula and call for a new formula that can take the region into a safer future. In the past, 1916, 1919, following World War I, actually the formula was the nation state. This formula is really suffering from and unable to, as I said, to sustain and hold. So the new formula has to be, or has to meet certain requirements, and these requirements, I think, on the top of which is the issue of inclusiveness, integration, rule of law. And if you look at what kind of formula, what kind of a political formula that can really provide all this, it should be a system that's based on democratic values. Of course, that has to be adjusted to certain local and contextual realities, Islamic values, cultural values, traditional values, in order to produce in the end a successful formula. That's our role as intellectuals. Sorry for taking so long, but I felt that this was really important to share with you. And I will now turn the floor to our keynote speakers. We'll start with Bishop Guixot.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor for me to represent the Holy See at this 5th Annual International Conference. On behalf of the Holy See, I greet you all and express my thanks to the Research Center for Islamic Legislation and Ethics for organizing this international conference. I would like to offer some points for your consideration during this important conference so that people everywhere may become true promoters of peace and dialogue. Indeed, the topic of this international conference is timely due to the present situation in which, in various ways, it is evident that we are going through a difficult and trying moment in history. This demands both reflection and action taken together to counter any kind of resistance against the peace we all desire and hope for in our world. We all, as members of one and the same human family, deserve it. The title of this important conference focuses on essential issues of which humanity is suffering today. First, the spread of conflicts in bits and pieces around the world, to the point that His Holiness Pope Francis speaks of a third world war in pieces. Second, the spread of a mentality where basic ethical human principles are vanishing. thus a resistance to true ethical values for building up together the common good. And third, the misunderstanding and misperception of the true meaning of peace and the manipulation of terms and principles like jihad and just war to justify violence and terror in the name of religion. The 9/11 terrorist attacks by Islamist militant groups wrongly claiming to act in the name of Islam and true Muslims have become the symbol of this new era of terror that has led the human family to begin the new millennium under the stigma of violent conflict and, unfortunately, by negating the value of human life motivated by a false understanding of religion. This reality, executed aggressively in the past by known terrorist groups claiming responsibility for such violence, is being presently continued by other religious groups claiming to be Muslims fighting a jihad against Muslims and what they call the West. In examining this conflict between groups labeled as terrorists and the Western powers, differences emerge between the so-called Christian just war theory and Islamic jihad, indicating opposing notions of conflict and resistance ethics. The time has come to consider a more critical understanding of these two principles, as this Research Center for Islamic Legislation and Ethics is remarkably doing. We, Christians and Muslims, are struggling together to counter this misperception of religion, which is spreading particularly among the young. In the so-called war on terror, both sides have taken great pains to justify their actions in moral terms. As more force is employed, so are sophisticated arguments which directly invoke the just war traditions of the West and Islam. These terrorist groups, who have nothing in common with any religion or any believer or any doctrine, took from the just war concept and in some cases reconceptualized their scope and content for their own use. Rather than a clash between civilizations, it appears from the war on terror that there is a clash within civilizations. In resorting to violence, both sides have acted against their own cultural and religious traditions. Without entering more specifically into the notion of jihad that our Muslim partners will share during this international conference, as a Christian, I would like to share with you some ideas, far from being exhaustive, concerning the concept of the so-called just war theory in our Christian tradition. The main point of the just war theory, as expressed by various scholars, is articulated in the works of St. Augustine, who lived in the 4th and 5th centuries after Christ, and St. Thomas Aquinas, a 13th century scholar. To put it simply, both agree that a war can be just only when it is carried out by a legitimate authority on the basis of a just cause and motivated by right intentions. Jesus' message is overwhelmingly one of peace. This is clearly evident in his preaching and teachings, Blessed are the peacemakers. The legitimate use of armed force, according to the Catholic Church, has to be understood in the light of the commandment that says, "You shall not kill." Recalling this commandment, Jesus asked for peace of heart and denounced murderous anger and hatred as immoral. According to the Catechism of the Catholic Church, the commandment forbids the intentional destruction of human life. Because of the evils and injustices that accompany all war, the Church insistently urges everyone to prayer and to action so that the divine goodness may free us from the ancient bondage of war. Consequently, all citizens and all governments are obliged to work for the avoidance of war. Furthermore, the Second Vatican Council, in the Pastoral Constitution on the Church in the Modern World, Gaudium et Spes, clearly states that any act of war aimed indiscriminately at the destruction of entire cities of extensive areas along with their population is a crime against God and man himself. It merits unequivocal and unhesitating condemnation. The Bishop of the whole world, gathered in the Council, beg all men, especially government officials and military leaders, to give constant thought to their gigantic responsibility before God and the entire human race. This absolute condemnation of war finds a sole limit in the recognition of the right to legitimate self-defense, once every means of peaceful settlement has been exhausted. In this way, legitimate self-defense, so understood, replaces the so-called just war doctrine. In fact, state authorities and others who share public responsibility have the duty to protect the welfare of the people entrusted to their care. As long as the danger of war persists and there is no international authority with the necessary competence and power, governments cannot be denied the right of lawful self-defense once all peace efforts have failed. Legitimate self-defense is not only a right, but also a grave duty for someone responsible for another's life. Preserving the common good requires rendering the unjust aggressors unable to inflict harm. To this end, those holding legitimate authority have the right to repel by armed force aggressors against the civil community entrusted to their charge. But it is one thing to undertake military action for the just defense of the people and something else to seek the subjugation of other nations. The gravity of such a decision makes it subject to rigorous conditions of moral legitimacy. The evaluation of these conditions for moral legitimacy belongs to the prudential judgment of those who have responsibility for the common good. The strict conditions for legitimate defense by military force are, at the same time, the damage inflicted by the aggressor on the nation or community of nations must be lasting, grave, and certain. All other means of putting an end to it must have been shown to be impractical or ineffective. There must be serious prospect of success, and the use of arms must not produce evils and disorders graver than the evil to be eliminated. The power of modern means of destruction weighs very heavily in evaluating this condition. This understanding of the legitimate use of armed force complies with and enriches the provision of the United Nations Charter. This treaty, in fact, engages all member states of the organization to refrain in their international relations from the threat of use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state. But at the same time, the United Nations Charter recognizes the inherent right of individual or collective self-defense if an armed attack occurs against a member state. Sadly, in the past, different situations have also led Christians to justify the use of violence, in part for religious reasons. One notable example is the Crusades, when it was believed that war, with its intent to free the holy places, would naturally have the support of God. In the 20th century, the Catholic teaching on the relationship between religion and the rejection of violence have become an object of careful reflection. In this context, I would like to call to mind what Pope St. John Paul II said, and I quote, "More perhaps than ever before in history, the intrinsic link between an authentic religious attitude and the great good of peace has become evident to all." 30 years later, last month of September in Assisi, Pope Francis stated, and I quote, "Our religious traditions are diverse, but our differences are not the cause of conflict and dispute or a cold distance between us. We have not prayed against one another today." There was the prayer in Assisi, and has unfortunately sometimes occurred in history. And he added, "We further declare that violence in all its forms does not represent the true nature of religion. It is the antithesis of religion and contributes to its destruction. We never tire of repeating that the name of God cannot be used to justify violence." And then the Pope said, "Peace alone is holy. Peace alone is holy, not war." Pope Francis' invitation to a profound turning of this page for the sake of the human family could not be more explicit, overcoming past notions and instances of the so-called holy war. So, how can conflicts and wars be avoided? Dialogue is an actual necessity, not a choice. There can be no peace in the world without dialogue, especially among believers, who are by far the majority of humanity today. In all religions, there is a treasury of values that can contribute towards building a world of justice, peace, fraternity, and prosperity. What is needed is to put together and embrace these values, believed in and accepted by the followers of religions in every part of the world, in order to make a global difference. Let us call on all these people of goodwill, to whom we are called to extend our hands in fraternity and friendship, and seek collaboration for the common good, for a better world. Pope Francis is convinced that if we seek out other people, other cultures, other ways of thinking, other religions, we go out of ourselves and start that most beautiful adventure, which is called dialogue. Dialogue is very important for our own maturity, because in confronting another person, confronting other cultures, and also confronting other religions in the right way, we grow, we develop, we mature. This dialogue is what creates peace, and it is impossible for peace to exist without dialogue. Therefore, the promotion of a culture of encounter, as Pope Francis calls it, one that is open and fruitful with the other, demands that we be ready to listen. Aware that today we live among a wounded humanity, Pope Francis believes that the motivation for interreligious dialogue must rest in the mutual commitment to peace and justice, thus making them the basic principle for all our exchanges. In fact, interreligious dialogue is a necessary condition for peace in the world, and thus a duty for all of us. Dialogue creates a school of humanity and becomes an instrument of unity, helping to build a better society founded on mutual respect and friendship. It is always worth remembering, however, that for dialogue to be authentic and effective, it presupposes a solid identity. Without an established identity, dialogue is of no use or even harmful. For this, dialogue must be friendly and sincere. So, extremist tendencies, irrespective of their origin, are without any doubt among the most dangerous threats to world peace and security. Such radical movements introduce fundamental and sudden changes by imposing uncompromising and violent policies. They create an environment in which mutual acceptance and understanding cannot coexist. This gives way to various kinds of animosity towards people of different ideologies, race, and beliefs. Consequently, we must increase our awareness that any kind of war is incompatible with true religious ethics. What is required in order to do this is a serious and widespread formation that fosters dialogue, together with genuine efforts by religious leaders and opinion makers to identify those persons who portray false beliefs and behaviors as part of their religious ideology. As religious leaders, we are obliged to denounce all violations against human dignity and human rights. Human life, a gift of God the Creator, possesses a sacred character. As such, any violence that seeks religious justification warrants the strongest condemnation, because the Omnipotent is the God of life, the God of peace. The world expects those who claim to adore God to be men and women of peace who are capable of living as brothers and sisters regardless of ethnic, religious, cultural, or ideological differences. We Muslims and Christians are the bearers of spiritual treasures of inestimable worth. Recognizing and developing our common spiritual heritage through interreligious dialogue helps us to promote and to uphold moral values, peace, and freedom in society. Such peace is an universal responsibility. We are called to go forth together along the path of the proposed subject of this international conference, that is, to be promoters of true ethical values to counter any kind of possible conflict so that we may overcome this historical concept of war and foster that good which engenders peace. Given the critical nature of this context, we cannot remain indifferent. Today, the world has a profound thirst for peace. In many countries, people are suffering due to wars, which, though often forgotten, remain always the cause of suffering and poverty. We do not have weapons. We believe, however, in the meek and humble strength of prayer and dialogue, inspired, as the Pope said, by common values and strengthened by genuine fraternal sentiments. Muslims and Christians are called to work together for the sake of justice, peace, and respect for the dignity and rights of every person, especially in those regions where they once lived for centuries in peaceful coexistence and now tragically suffer together the horrors of war. To end, I would like to express my ardent desire that during the work and exchanges of these days, we may work together to change the misperceptions that prevail in our world, and that full of hope we may commit ourselves to promote sincere dialogue. Let us not forget that in our religions there is a treasury of values that can contribute towards building a world of justice, peace, fraternity, and prosperity. In the most, and to end, and I quote Pope Francis, in the most local and ordinary situations and the international order, may non-violence become the hallmark of our decisions, our relationships, and our actions, and indeed of political life in all its forms. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Your Eminence, for a very inspiring presentation and very sincere reflections about the way out of wars and conflicts that are plaguing very important regions in the world and are threatening our, as you mentioned, human family. I would like to invite us, all of us, even to take it a step further and think of instruments and mechanisms that we can put forth together in order to promote peace and foster an effective dialogue that in the end will lead, as you mentioned, to peace, collaboration, and prosperity. Thank you very much. Now we turn the floor to Professor Tariq Ramadan. So please.
In the name of Allah, the Gracious, the Merciful, all praise is due to Allah. May the peace of Allah be on Prophet Muhammad, his household, and his companions.
For being with us and sharing this session, and His Excellency the Bishop Guixot for being with us. We met many times before, and I'm very happy to have him with us. And really, as a center, I want to thank all the people, the visible people and the invisible volunteers that are helping us to make it possible to have this conference today, and at the same time to be able to be heard around the world in 3 languages. And you might think that we are few here. Still, we are many in this room, but over the 2 days, there are thousands that are following our work in 3 languages. So I want to thank them for following, and thank you for being here. I read your paper, and I listened to you again right now, and I think that there are many points that you are making that are critical for all of us. And what I want to do is to react to what you said, but at the same time to add a few points that I think are critical in our discussion from an Islamic perspective about jihad and qital, but also for us as people coming from different religious traditions to understand that today we have a critical responsibility. We can't just sit down and say, you know what, our religions are for peace and that's it. We need to take a stand, not only a self-critical stand, of course we have to do this and I will explain, but we also have to deal with the world the way it is and to be able sometimes to say in clear words that religions are instrumentalized by some and we are making religious things that are not religious at all. And as you said, Professor Ahmad, in the world today and what is happening in the Middle East, but not only. So let me just highlight a few points that I think are important in our discussion, because if we are talking about, if we talk about war and we talk about jihad and qital and just war, what we care about is peace, and this is what you were saying and repeating. Okay. So, and what we have to do from within our respective religious tradition, as we take text seriously, we have to deal with the text and we have to come back to the text and being able to show in which way in our respective tradition, historically speaking, as well as when it comes to the text themselves, there are many interpretations. You cannot deny the fact that there are mainstream interpretation in a very specific period of time and things are changing. Even some scholars were able to change their position depending on the context within which they were. So I think that we need to be serious about what do the texts say and in which way there is a room for interpretation. And this was part of the Turas al-Islami. It's something which is in our tradition. And to say, for example, today, you know what, jihad was always understood about peace and the spiritual thing, and that's wrong. That's historically it's wrong. But to say it's only about holy war, as it was translated by Orientalists, and by saying it's about killing the non-believers, that's wrong as well. So this is why we have to be serious with our tradition and come to some of the main contributions that we had. And unfortunately, over the 2 days, tomorrow mainly, we'll be able to talk about this and to come also to some of the main positions and the main interpretations from the great scholars that we have in the past. One who is very much quoted today in a very wrong way by some of its followers or so-called followers when it comes to Ibn Taymiyyah in the 13th century. His student Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawziyya, Suyuti, talking about the different occurrences of jihad, their interpretations, their understanding from jihad in many ways, and then qital in specific ways with specific conditions. We have to do this work and we have to be able to come. And this was an ongoing process. Even now we have the book which was published a few years ago by Sheikh Yusuf al-Qardawi, Al-Fiqh al-Jihad. You can see in this book that he himself changed his position on some issues. He's moving himself. So in a lifetime, you can change your position. So in history, you have many interpretations, and we have to be serious about this and not to idealize the past or to reduce the scope of our own interpretations in the tradition. That's important because this is where there is a critical discussion that is needed and a self-assessment of what was understood. So yes, some scholars made the texts say things that were for us today or are for us today problematic in the way they were describing the other, the non-Muslims, Dar al-Harb. And even the notion of Dar al-Harb is a definition that what is not within and with us is to be problematized as a potential space of war. The very notion of Dar al-Harb is in itself saying something which has to be understood and analyzed. So I said that on this is where what you are saying in your own tradition, in the Catholic tradition, in the Christian tradition, in the Jewish tradition, in all the traditions, we have this, and we have to be serious with our past and our historical contribution. What is also important is we can't, when it comes to ourselves, contextualize the interpretations and essentialize the interpretations of the other. We can't do that. And this is what is happening with some today with Islam. They contextualize everything about Christianity and essentialize everything about Islam. They say, you are saying this because one scholar said this in history. It's one scholar. But if you come to the history of another tradition, you will find Catholic priests saying things that were also problematic. So we can't reduce Christianity to one voice. We can't reduce Islam to one interpretation. That's not possible. So we are doing very often this. We come with our great values and we deal with the practices of the other, or we relativize our own past and we essentialize the past of the other. And as you said, one of the conditions of peace is dialogue, and I agree with this, but dialogue should be, the starting point is on an equal basis with intellectual humility and self-critical approach. So we have to do this, and especially now where the media coverage is making one religion almost the embodiment of everything which has to do with violence in religion. So that's a reduction, and that's a lie in scholarly term, and we have to come together. And we have to come together. I'm saying this, which is very essential. What I'm saying this now about Islam is not only a Muslim business. It's all of us. All of us have to do this and come together to be able not to try to essentialize one religion and to target one, and not to come to a discussion on the whole thing. Now, so this critical take, I would say, my understanding, and I have been writing a lot and quoting so many scholars in our history, saying, at the end of the day, we have to be clear. If you have to talk about peace and war, the natural state of human being is not to be at peace, either with ourselves, with the world. We are in tension. It's through an education that we create peace. The natural state of human beings is to be in conflict and confrontation. You find your way and your space in the world. Look at your babies, your kids. They are not at peace like this. You educate them to be at peace. So if there is something which is important, it's not to keep on repeating, sitting here as people who are not experiencing conflict. You know what? Islam is a religion of peace. Christianity is a religion of peace. No. Our religions are calling for peace, telling us, educate yourself. Do what you have to do, because peace is to be taken seriously, and it has conditions. You have to work for it. You have to do things for it. You have to work with your own self and to work with your neighbor and to do something which is a human process of self-education to promote peace. So war is more natural than to be at peace with your own self. The internal tension is something that we are all experiencing. So when the people are saying, you as religious people, you should not talk about war, of course we have to talk about war because we talk about human beings. When you speak and you talk about humanity, you have to deal with wars, you have to deal with conflict. You cannot avoid that. The question is, how are you going to develop a process that is helping the people to go from potential tensions to educated peace? So this is why jihad, and even the qital as one of its translation, is a way towards peace. It's not a way towards war. So it's the opposite of what we are saying now in our understanding very often and what it said about Islam. Having said that, just to come to what you were saying and some of the things that I wanted to add. I think that the starting point when it comes to our discussion as religious people or people speaking from within the religious tradition is to be clear on what is religious and what is not. And to make this clear, sometimes we have to be very vocal. Once I was in the Vatican and I met with one of the special advisors to the Pope at that time, Benedict XVI. It was somebody who was my own teacher in philosophy in Geneva, the Cardinal Pierre Cotier, who was there. And I was telling him, if we want to make, for example, and it's the symbol of the conflict in the Middle East, Palestine and Israel, if we want to make clear that it's not a religious issue, we need to have religious voices coming and saying, as to the holy sites, the Jews, the Christians, and the Muslims have a right to the holy sites with no discrimination. That's the starting point of not making it a religious discussion. And to say, now, let us talk about the political. But if you and you are silent which was not the position of the Vatican, for example, for years. But if you are silent about what is happening there and letting things being between Jews and Muslims, we end up thinking it's a religious problem, while it's not, because the Christians are as discriminated as the Muslims when it comes to what is the right of the Palestinians. What I'm saying here is that sometimes the religious voices should be clear on the fact of what they are expecting from a religious viewpoint, making clear that, for example, in the situation now in Palestine, it's not the religious issues, it's not a religious issue, it's a political reality, and what should be clear in religious terms is the holy sites are for all in equal rights and equal terms. And it's sometimes the same when it comes within. We have to be clear that we might disagree on what is happening in Syria. My position, for example, is that we are facing a dictator. Bashar al-Assad is a dictator, and he has to be removed. No discussion. This is my political position. Am I going now to end up saying my political position is putting me in a situation when I am a Sunni versus the Shia, and no way we have now to fight? I think that the shift between the political position to religious conflict is a trap. And I think that we have to be very cautious within, because some people are playing with this, instrumentalizing the religious belonging by explaining the political disagreements. So we have also to be quite clear. It's not to say that the position that we can see now in political terms are not sometimes influenced by our religious affiliation, but we have to be clear not to end up making a political discussion into a religious division. If we do this, it's very dangerous. Why I'm saying this, because even in our understanding that what we have coming from within the religious communities, it's a problem. The way they are justifying, the way they are going to kill and they are going to war in religious terms, and by saying that there is a justification coming from us because we have now some Sunnis saying the Shia are not Muslims. And going as far as this is problematic. Now the question is, can we go as far as that? I think that if we are not serious about the political discussion and the religious belonging, we are going to mix everything and making religious war things that are to be politically understood. That's the starting point of, I think, our discussion about jihad and our discussion about qital and our discussion about the way we deal with war. Now, having said this, I would just add to the conditions that you put. You said education, and I agree it's essential. No, you said dialogue, and you said encounter. I would say, as I said at the beginning, that one of the conditions of peace, when it comes to even the way we have to deal with the notion of jihad, has to do with education. As I said, individual and collective education, when it comes to peace, education is so it's the way you deal with your own self, but also with your own tradition. Education is central to understand how am I going to be at peace with myself and at peace with the people before even starting the dialogue, before even starting the encounter. So this is essential. But there is another one which I think we need to put as an essential discussion. For me, for 25 years, I kept on repeating that the most important value in Islam was justice. Today, and this was mainly after I wrote the book on the seerah of the Prophet, peace be upon him, the highest level, the highest value for me, it's peace. And one of the conditions of peace is justice and dignity. وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ, the dignity of human being. Treat the people with no dignity, you are paving the way for war. That's the reality. No dignity, no peace. So what we are doing today, while we are seeing that we have people dying in the Mediterranean Sea, refugees and migrants, and they are treated with no dignity, you're not going to get peace at the international level if you're not treating people with equal dignity. That's the starting point. The second, and we have to be clear, and this is why I was very happy to see the Pope Francis being able to say, I'm going to welcome not only migrants that are Christians, but to the world saying, I'm welcoming migrants that are Muslims, because he was responding to all the rhetorics that we have now in Europe by saying we have to differentiate between Muslims and other people. So this was a very strong, humanitarian statement? No, it was a political statement saying equal dignity, whatever your religion. And I would like to say also sometimes the Muslims doing exactly the same, which sometimes is not clear.
because we are very happy to welcome the Pope. You are doing well. What are we doing on that when it comes to no difference, when it comes to welcome the refugees? And here I'm talking about the states, because at the grassroots level, we agree on that. The second thing, which is also important, is justice. Justice is a condition. I mean, we have to put it as, if you are not treating the people with justice, they are not going to be, it's not possible. So to sit down and to keep on talking about peace and not coming to the justice as a condition, so I would say that this is also what you said when we were talking about just war, and this is also what we have in the Christian tradition. It's a very powerful tradition. St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas, they are very powerful in this discussion. Up to recent theories on just war, very, very powerful. And even, I know that you are not going to quote them, but I like them very much, are the liberation theologians. Because they are very powerful when it comes to justice is a condition of peace, and they are saying, let us have a society where the people are treated with dignity and justice. And I think that this is the starting point of a very strong and a renewed discourse on jihad and qital when it comes to this. There is something that we have to do, and this is where I'm not happy with many of our religious institutions when we come together, and especially in interfaith dialogue, is that we talk about peace, we talk about the necessity of peace, but we also have to deal with the reasons of violence. There are reasons. The people even, to try to understand is not to justify. We had this said by Bush, we had this said by some politicians say, if you try to understand, it means that you are justifying. No, you try to understand in order to solve the problem. You're not justifying the problem, but you try to understand the people who are ending violent extremists, the people who are ending killing innocent people. We cannot justify and we have to condemn, but we need to get a sense of why is it happening? What are the reasons? So we should not follow in the footsteps of the media coverage, showing you pictures of what is happening and saying condemn. And that's it. Yes, I condemn, and then I want to understand in order. And the religious discourse should be a discourse helping the people to get also a sense of what is religious, what is not, and what are the reasons. Why are we facing this? And I think that sometimes we are very idealistic when it comes to religious discourse and not enough talking about the reasons and why it's happening. And once again, I repeat, to try to understand and to get the reasons doesn't mean that we are justifying the results. We are just trying to understand why this is happening. Why, for example, today the Syrian situation is happening. It's not coming from nowhere. Palestine is not coming from nowhere. What is happening in the Middle East is not coming from nowhere. When you look at what is happening in Africa, in Rwanda, for example, it's not coming from nowhere. You can't just condemn and say, as a religious man, I condemn, that's it. No, I have to be involved. We are dealing with human beings. We are dealing with brothers and sisters in humanity, and we need to get a sense here. And I would say that our religious discourse should apprehend and should deal with all these things. To the last point that I wanted to also add to this, that's very nice to speak about peace. It's very nice to speak about trying to find the ways of dialogue and everything. But there is one word that I think we need to consider and to get some definitions that are missing in the whole thing. And there is one word that when you are going and you are traveling in the global south, we don't have the same definition. And this word is violence. Violence, what does it mean? How do we define violence? Is violence only weapons and wars, or the violence of the global economic system, where you have every day 150,000 people dying out of starvation? Is this not a violent system? So if we look, it's the visible violence is we use weapons, and the invisible violence is killing the people, and these are innocent people. In terms of the non-accepted definition in the United Nations of terrorism, terrorism is to kill innocent people, is to target innocent people. Our system is creating violence to people who are dying out of starvation and indignified situation, and we want to get peace and not to have people reacting to what is happening? That's just not possible. We have a system, a global system, which is producing all the conditions of war. Are we going to deal with the system or just ask the people be at peace? while we are exploiting you? Is this what we are doing? Are our religious voices coming to say to the exploited, keep calm, and to the exploiters, carry on, because it's invisible violence? Are we the voice to confirm and to help the people who are exploiting to carry on? Are we serious about peace to the point that we go to the reasons? That's the discourse that I think we need to have. This is the renewed understanding of what is jihad. I would like jihad for justice, jihad for solidarity, jihad for dignity, jihad for freedom, jihad for equal rights. These are the true jihads, but you have to keep them alive if you want to be serious about peace. If you don't talk about this, it's just idealistic. And it's even worse than that. I find myself sometimes talking about peace, having people in the room who are promoting a system of violent exploitation, and they are very happy with what I'm saying. Carry on. Say it. They are going to be calm and we are going to carry on exploiting. I think it's serious. It's a serious question here. Who are we supporting? And what is this discourse? And then the last point that, so violence, and this is why I'm saying the big picture is important. And what you said, it's also important, and I want to add my voice to your voice because it's in your text, is that it's very important not to have selective condemnation. Selective condemnation is also, to be quite clear, I have a problem with the phrase that we have in some of our institutional reports, the legitimate use of force. So when the state is killing innocent people, is legitimate use of force. When people are reacting, these are terrorists. And the wordings are important. One is legitimate and the other is illegitimate. And we end up condemning some and accepting or agreeing. And when you look at what is happening, how many innocent people were killed or dying in Iraq before even the war? How many today in Syria? How many around the world? And when it comes to even in Afghanistan, I'm sorry, we were told it was a legitimate use of force to kill innocent civilian Afghani who had nothing to do with the bombing of the 11th September. So we end up condemning some and not the others. And I think the right thing to do here is no selective condemnation. If we want to be serious with the people, the dominated, if we want to be serious with people who are asking for more dignity, if we want to be serious with our own tradition, we have to come with this. We cannot just acknowledge that there are problems. So what you are saying, it's important. And we have to do it, and when I'm saying this, it's not only between the legitimate use of force versus the terrorists, it's also within our community. Within our community. Within our respective communities, we are making differences. I see today people who were with me against the dictators accepting that some of the people they are supporting are putting people in jail even though they are innocent. Because my friends are my friends before being people representing the principles. So I would say that it could happen in Syria, it could happen in Iraq, it could happen in Turkey, it could happen in Egypt. People who, when you talk about justice, are in the right side of history when they are with their own people. But if it's the others, I'm not going to support. That's a lack of consistency, and I think that this is where we have to be serious with the notion of jihad and the notion even of qital and the respective understanding. So, having said that, I think that the religious voices, and this is why I think it's important to have you, Bishop, with us, to be able to say, we have a responsibility. It's important to understand that we have to come to dialogue. We need to promote this encounter. It's important to talk about education and justice, and it's important to have a sense of our own legacy on this. And we have to add our voices to the situation within the world today. So we are told that the religious voices shouldn't be political. And I would say there is a difference between confusing politics and religion and having a religious political voice. So what I said, it's important for me. When Pope Francis decided to welcome refugees and migrants, Muslims, and saying this in Europe, I'm welcoming them, this was a powerful political statement, saying justice, dignity, equal rights, welcome. And I think that we have to take it as it is. That's a very powerful statement, and it was a powerful statement without too many words. Just to do it as he did it was important, and I think that this is why I think it's important to have this discussion, because we are learning from our religious brothers and sisters from other traditions. I think that this is where this positive competition, it's important that we have in the Quran. In the Quran, we have the fact that this diversity is helping us to be in positive competition when it comes to our reality, our political voices when it comes to conflicts, but also when it comes to, I'm sorry, migrations today are potential ways and paving the ways towards war in the future. Because people are fleeing conflicts, they are coming, and some, at the time when I'm talking to you now, at the borders of the Balkans today, we have refugees, they are animals, they are treated like animals. You are not going to get peace at the continental level, at the international level, if we keep quiet on this. And it's a moral duty for us, as I said, and I want to end up with this. It's a moral duty for us to condemn what is done in our name. So I don't like the Muslims saying what is done by Daesh, for example, has nothing to do with Islam, they are not Muslims. No, we have to respond to this. We have no right to put people outside Islam. But we have the moral duty to say why it's against the Islamic message and why they have a distorted understanding of Islam. We have to do this, and we have to be clear on this. But it's also a moral duty to do this. But it's a moral duty as well to try to understand why people could end up being influenced by these distorted messages. And it cannot be only by us sitting down here and condemning the people and not understanding that it might be. Let me tell you something which I want to end with this. I am not going to name the brother, but I had a brother in the United States of America, and everything that he was saying coming from his religious tradition, from Islam, from my tradition, the way he was talking about the messengers, peace be upon them, the way he was speaking about Islam was open and very, very wise. It took 2 years of imprisonment and torture to change the guy completely, to make him lose his mind. So today, I may condemn, and I condemn what he did and what he supported. But there is one thing that I cannot do, is not to understand that under torture, under repression, you can change a human being, and you have to get this right. So to condemn the repression and torture, not only the actions, because any one of us in this room, 2 years, we can make you another human being. Torture, undignified. And if you read the way some people in prisons, in Guantanamo, they have been treated. When you read, for example, somebody who is in the UK today talking, Muazzam Beg, 1.5 hour confession about the way they were treating him in jail, undignified, to dehumanize him. Alhamdulillah, he went out of this as a wise Muslim, saying, you are not my teacher. I'm going to teach you what Islam is all about. And 5 years later, he invited the guardian that he was guarding him in Guantanamo, he invited him at his home in Birmingham. But he was one of them. But how many are losing their mind and becoming completely crazy? So I would say, condemn the actions and try to understand the people. Wallahu alam. Assalamu alaikum.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Ramadan. Here you have two very stimulating presentations. Two voices that ostensibly seem different, but as a matter of fact, the way I read them, they share the same concerns and the same aspirations for a better, more dignified humanity. Also, nothing is more true than this juxtaposition between just war theory and jihad, which in this case, if you look at also the rules of qital or the principles of qital and not necessarily jihad, you will see a lot of commonalities between the jurisprudential principles behind qital and the principles of just war theory. As one excellent scholar has put it when he was comparing between the concerns of Catholics and the concerns of Muslims in the contemporary world, he described them as, that was the title of his piece, "Our differences are the same." Our differences are the same. We share a lot in common. If you look at the example that His Eminence gave about the principle of just war theory, the issue of necessity, that war has to be a necessity and not an after all peaceful means have been exhausted, the existence of a legitimate authority to carry out war, the concept of proportionality, avoiding innocent civilians, and I may add also heeding any call for peace. These are some of the principles of war and non-aggression, of course. These are some of the principles behind the concept of qital in Islam, and as you see, again, the differences are the same. And actually, the excellent scholar's name, to his credit, is Scott Appleby. I'm sure is very known to you, and also to Dr. Tariq Ramadan. Now the floor is yours. You heard two stimulating presentations, so you can come up with also stimulating questions. If I just would like to, if I may impress on you, please state your name, your affiliation, and to try to state your comment in the form of a question. For the sake of and try to make it brief so we can entertain as many questions as possible, because I'm sure many of you would have queries and also clarifications that would like to get from our respected speakers. So the floor is yours now. Yes.
In the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful, Izzat An-Nimr, a writer. I hope my question is not going to be too long, but I'm going to try to cover some of the issues that have been talked about. We have an issue that is very dangerous indeed. So deviation for an individual can be dangerous, and what is more dangerous is the deviation or deviance of the elite or the systems. But the deviance that cannot be accepted is one of the religious institutions. In case religious institutions deviate, so once they deviate from their message, it becomes a catastrophe, because these are the basis, because they have to rectify any issues and put people on the right track. I have a question that I would like to ask to the Church or to the Vatican. Maybe the Vatican have freedom of movement, of resolution. And unfortunately, our religious institutions might be maybe restricted because they are under the upper hand of our regimes. My question is to His Eminence, the Bishop. You mentioned a number of points. You talked about the 11th of September as if it is a truth, a reality. It is not a reality. There are some people who are still trying to understand whether it was a made-up case or a real case. And talking about terrorism, there should be a definition of the term terrorism. Politicians should come up with a definition for terrorism, let alone when it comes to the different religious institutions. We should not just try to spread it, talk about it in one instance, and also try to link it to a religious message. The war on terrorism, is it a real war? Is what Russia doing in Syria, is it a war on terrorism? Is what is taking place in other places a war on terrorism? Another question, are there people who are making terrorism to benefit from it? Some people say that Daesh is made up by certain entities because they want to make the best of it. So this is very important indeed. So the other point, this is your fifth question. All my interventions, they fall within the same question. When we talk about the term authorities, what was the Vatican's position vis-à-vis the killing of Regini? Those who killed Regini was a power, an authority, and not an individual person. There are millions of people similar to Regini in Syria and Egypt and so on and so forth. This is a point that is worthy of reflection. You talked about self-defense. What is the position of the message with regard to resistance in Palestine? Last point. This is your third last point that you mentioned so far. You talked about the United Nations. Does the United Nations represent truth or justice? Yesterday, we have seen one of the UN agency's directors, because the Secretary General of the UN asked her to withdraw one of the UN reports because it condemns Israel.
شكرا جزيلا. يا دكتور طارق.
Please, Dr. Tariq Ramadan, help me for us to be able to answer these questions. Thank you so much.
You are, by listening to what I have shared with you, it is not exhaustive, and therefore it has a very specific finality for me to help you, since by the fact that I am a Catholic, to put to you how we have reconsidered the concept of conflict, the concept of war, of legitimate defense, and so on. But the real issue is linked to I am a religious leader. So I'm not really responsible for dealing with political issues as a religious leader. The only thing I may tell you, to respond to some of the questions you raised of a kind of political character from what you understood from my presentation, I cannot really respond to you. The only thing I may tell you is that, well, the Vatican has always exercised a major role in reconciling communities, in reconciling groups, by the fact of being, let us say, independent, or let us say, always remaining on the edge of what is the different politics exercised by different governments. So in respect for that, also many governments, they rely on the Vatican authorities to mediate in order to exercise a kind of moral authority. So in that context, policies and diplomacy are very helpful to contribute in building a better world by promoting any initiative that may lead to peace. I say that peace has a twin sister, and this is called justice. So we cannot understand peace without justice. There are many injustices today in the world. Many of our evils are coming because of an increasing process of inequalities that are making people more suffering, more poorer, among the poorest, and this is raising, as Dr. Tariq Ramadan has stressed at the end, the suffering of the people, and that is really at the origin of future conflicts, unless we really try to promote a better. Now, I don't know exactly from any other details you have given of political character, because I don't have any responsibility as a religious leader. I am promoting interreligious dialogue, so as a religious leader, I promote dialogue among religious leaders. The only thing I may tell you from my personal experience is that today there is a necessity to combine and to bring in together politicians with religious leaders, listening to each other in order to collaborate and to contribute between these two different fields of life, of our human reality, without any interference, in a very harmonious way. So there is a necessity for this. But for this also we need the necessity for education. And in this context, we have to educate the educators. We have to educate the educators, because many of our evils are coming from educators. We have to educate people. Somebody was telling me recently, I would like to see somebody, a political leader like Pope Francis, like saying he's so fine in responding with his life, with his witness, and receiving this moral authority given by people, not only Christians, but Muslims, and belonging to other religious traditions, people of goodwill, for what he says, and people telling me I would like to have and to see politicians decidedly resoluted to solve conflicts in a kind way. Pope Francis is acting as a moral authority, not only for Christians, but for the entire world. So I think that always it remains that today we are living in dark moment of our history. There is a real wounded humanity. We have to act in such a way that this is something very urgent. For this I told you how timely the subject is for us and for everybody to promote the education. Because it is through education that we could really one day say, well, you know, we are brothers and sisters. We are all together building society. We are struggling to promote the common good. And we should discuss, as I told once to one of my Muslim friends, you know, we should not discuss one in front of the other, a Christian or a Muslim, but we have to stand one next to the other, shoulder to shoulder, walking together and trying to answer and to collaborate to change our world and to say a word with authority so that things may change. So let us avoid any kind of confrontation, beginning from ourselves, from within our communities, and may our witness and what we do be extended to every person of goodwill for the transformation of our world. But let us not forget that many of our evils, unfortunately, are coming from the educators who are the first to be educated. Thank you.
Yes, please.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
May the peace and blessings of God be upon you. Mohamed El-Moctar Al-Hajj, professor at Qatar University. My first question is to Dr. Tariq Ramadan. The dialogue started decades ago, and we had seen many conferences, interfaith conferences convened between Christians and Muslims. But the gap between Muslims and Christians is increasing. The wave of hate is being deepened and branched out as a result of the phenomenon of Islamophobia. What is the shortcoming? As to your eminence, the bishop, you talked about theoretical aspects of Christianity, and the theoretical aspects of Christianity and Islam are very much known. But what is the relationship between theory and practice? Most wars that have been waged by humanity, religion was present in those wars. The Crusades, civil wars, all of these were religious wars. Even the last war on Iraq that was waged by the West, religion was present there in a way or another. So our problem is the empowerment of religious values, because we do not want these values to be just ink on paper. We would like them to be manifested on the ground. You talked about just war, and maybe you remember the concept of to marry queen that had led to the last wars, the 8th and 9th Crusade wars on the Islamic world. I do not think that the problem lies in the religious text, but it lies in the interpretation of this religious text. And may the peace of God be upon you all.
Are not talking to one another. Why the situation is worse today than it was in the past when it comes to the dialogue. I think that I wrote in the book Western Muslims and the Future of Islam, فصل كامل عن الحوار بين الأديان. So there is one full chapter on that, and saying that there are conditions. Today, you have to realize that the perception of Islam in the non-Muslim majority countries or in the West is very negative. And it's on purpose. So there is a media coverage making Islam the alien, the foreign religion. It's not a Western religion, to the point that you go on CNN and you hear people telling you it's very controversial that you are saying that Islam is a Western religion. Well, it is, of course it is. We are millions now of American, Canadian, European, Australian Muslims, and we are part of the society. So the fact that the media coverage is adding to this, the fact that there is a fracture between Islam and the so-called West, as you said, it's a so-called West. We don't know exactly what it means, but it seems that the West has the monopoly of the noble values. And some are reducing the West to Christianity or the Judeo-Christian tradition. Even when it comes to history, there is a lie, because the history of the Judeo-Christian tradition is not a Judeo-Christian tradition. It's a Judeo-Christian Islamic history. So I think that we have three things to do. A better understanding of history. So education is essential. Today, in our societies, in the West, and by the way, even here, even in the Muslim majority countries, the way we look at history, it's a very narrow. So because we are scared of the other, we are reducing our past to something which is not true. We are idealizing or reducing the past. So we need to get a better understanding of history. Now, what also it's important is not only a dialogue. The problem of dialogue of religions, for example, is now it's ended by being a dialogue of people who don't need dialogue. It's small circles, ندوات متخصصين في الحوار بين الأديان بينهم ليس لهم علاقة بالمجتمع. So we are not reaching out. We are not reaching the people. We need to educate the people. So interfaith dialogue should be something which is to educate the average people in their own religion. By the way, I keep on repeating, I'm a European. And I'm saying one of the main problems that I have with my fellow European is not only that they don't know about Islam, is they don't know about Christianity. They don't know about their own tradition. So which type of discourse and dialogue do you want to start? If you don't know who you are, of course it's not going to work. Religious illiteracy is making things worse today. This is the second problem, which has to do with, and the third, I would say, I'm going to surprise you. I'm asking Muslims to speak less about Islam. Stop talking about Islam. Now what we have to do is to behave like Muslims. So the future is not dialogue only. The future is common struggle. To be on the side of the Pope when he's saying, I'm welcoming Muslims or I'm welcoming migrants and there is no way we can accept the way we deal with refugees, Muslims should be on his side. When, for example, we have Black Lives Matter in the United States of America, when you have black people saying the way you are treating black people in the American society is unjust, Muslims should be part of this struggle because it has to do with dignity. Not because they are Muslims or not Muslims, because this is justice, this is dignity, this is what we have to do. So to work together. And Muslims in the West or Muslims around the world, we only see them when we speak about Islam. So I think that we have to be self-critical and to come and to be also involved with Christians and even with Jewish voices that are very clear about the fact that they don't accept the way a state, Israel, is behaving with and exploiting people. And at the same time, in their own society, there are voices. You know, I'm writing a book now. It's a second book with Edgar Morin, a Jewish French intellectual, who is very critical towards Israel, and he's coming with dignity. We have to come together. We have to work together. So we can't just sit down and say things are coming worse. In fact, at the local level, there are many interesting dynamics. But we as Muslims, and we as Christians or Jews or human beings, we need to change the way we are looking at things. We are falling into the trap of these conflicts. What should bind us together are principles. And I make it clear, I belong to my principles. If one Christian is doing good, I'm on his side. If one Muslim is doing bad, I'm against him. Can we start with this? Is this the way we can work together? It's the way we need to get out of this identity business that I'm a Muslim with Muslims and I speak about Islam and I read about Islam, and I think that this alienated mind, it's a problem. So I would say yes, it's not going better, but it's up to us to know what we have to do, and there are three things, as I said. Wallahu a'lam.
Shortly, simply to tell you that there has always been in history within our communities religious motivated violence. And I think we have to learn from the past, but as it has been stressed by Dr. Tariq Ramadan, we have to revisit history because it's not a question of reviving the past, but to build up together our future. So I don't know, but the little I studied about Islam, I remember that, and I was surprised that at the time in history, Muslim has denominated, for example, the Crusades, they have denominated them as Al-Afranj. And today, the use of the terminology is a little bit difficult to understand, to deliver a Salibiyya or a Salibiyun. In order to translate the Crusaders. The Crusaders at the time were considered by Muslims as French, the Franks who came from France in order to protect the holy sites. Holy sites are for all, that are to be shared in the holy city, in Jerusalem. So you see here just a simple, small example just to show how sometimes with goodwill or ill intention there have been quite a good number of violent reaction against others' community. So this is something that is to be left in the hands of the experts, of historians, and for us today, for building a better future, our real struggle, as I once said to one Muslim friend, is وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. I mean, let us do good deeds and let us make competition in good deeds rather than making competition in violence, in rejecting the other, in fighting against the other. But to counter all this, we need this education. We need also to pass through careful, accurate, scientific research work in that context. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum.
May the peace of God be upon you.
Ankara University professor in the Department of Tafsir and visiting professor in the College of Islamic Studies in the Hamad bin Khalifa University. Thank you very much. I am asking to the Professor Tariq Ramadan why we are giving the name of Salafi to the killers. Because 54,000 tafsir reports survived. If we investigate these reports, we are observing the contextualization, diversification. These killers are wanting to be free in front of the Mus'haf. Practically, that is true, but theoretically, they are saying that they are Salafi. I think with this type of losing the word of the Salafi is losing the importance in front of the world, and indirectly we are supporting them. That is, we are being deluded at this position because Imam of the Salafi people, Taberi, Sufyan al-Sawri, Qatada, Suddi, Mujahid, Sa'id ibn Jubair, these people are our peoples, not theirs. As I think we are being deluded with this type of using. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's better just to take, a few questions because I see more hands. So the gentleman, in the brown shirt, and then the gentleman, and then, the brown shirt. Yeah, can you raise your hand, please? Yes, over there. Miss, excuse me, over there. Yes, the gentleman. Yes.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. محمود دهشة من مدريد. السؤال للدكتور طارق رمضان كيف ممكن
The question is to Dr. Tariq Ramadan. Mahmoud Dahsha. My name is Mahmoud Dahsha. How can we help some of those youth who become extremists and they are at some point are assimilated in the Spanish society, and then all of a sudden they move on suddenly to a jihadi understanding, and sometimes some of them decide to go to Syria or Iraq or Afghanistan to support and aid their religion. And another question, we face questions in Madrid And the Spanish society asks us why your religion is easy and allows extremism. You are the only religion that there is ease for extremism. That is, you are promised of Hura'in, and then you become extremists all of a sudden, and then you want to become martyrs. We as Muslims in the West, how can we reply to those questions that we face from the Spanish society?
Yes. Yeah.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
Mohamed Abdullah Shawaf, Ministry of Endowment or Awqaf. My question is to Dr. Tariq Ramadan. You said that some texts need interpretation contrary to what it was interpreted in the past. I ask you here, what has been interpreted in the past by scholars was done through regulations that you know them, linguistics and understanding and concepts. So now we want to speak to people. If some non-educated youth hear that we are calling for an understanding of the texts as it suits us here and here, because the issue is relative. I could understand it that it is suitable when it is not suitable. So they interpreted that as revelation text according to regulations. So what are the regulations that we will use now to interpret that text? Do we have certain regulations and guidelines? Because some people, when they hear this word from you and from other people, they understand that they have the freedom to understand the text as they want, not as what Allah wants. Thank you. May Allah reward you.
For your question, I think it's a very important question, which I was once talking about a jihad of terminology, is to recapture and to reclaim our terminology and not to let the people using it in a way which is completely wrong. And it's not the only word. There are many words, many notions in Islam that is used by or understood by people of other faiths, Orientalists, and the way they are talking about, for example, Sharia, for example, jihad, or Salafi. And there are people outside of Islam who are using this term to say, and to reduce this term and to distort the very meaning of Sharia. For example, if you look at what is happening in the United States with the bill, the Sharia bill, understanding that Sharia is the penal code and we don't want the penal code in the state, you have this. We have a problem from within our tradition where the people are even trying to use certain notion by monopolizing the meaning. So you have the understanding of some ahadith by saying, we have a trend, for example, around the world saying, نحن الفرقة الناجية. So we are the only saved and we are the true Salafi, all the others are wrong, min Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. So this is also something that we have to deal with by saying, and coming to scholarly understanding of some words and some notions. And we have to be very clear. We can't let the people, because Salaf is Salih, and the Salafiyya tradition, even Salafiyya al-Harfiyya or Salafiyya al-Islahiyya, you have many notions that are, now we have Salafiyya al-Irhabiyya, and some even Muslim scholars are using this to differentiate between this and that. So sometimes by the pressure of the media, the pressure of within academia, you end up accepting some definitions, and these definitions are distorting the whole notion itself. So I agree with you. We can't accept that. So this is why, for example, we come with this conference and we say we want to come back to the true notion of jihad, to understand the meaning,
not by avoiding talking about our legacy, the past, but also coming to the understanding of the way we have to deal with it. But I agree with you, and this is something that we have to do within Muslim majority countries and outside, when we deal with the West, but also when we deal with ourselves. So to go very quickly and to say these are Salafists or Salafiyah, and not to understand the noble dimension of what it means to come back to the origin and to come back to the source and to come back to the energy of the source, that's essential. But we only also have this with people who are even reducing their own legacy by saying we are the followers of Ibn Taymiyyah, for example, and they reduce Ibn Taymiyyah to what they are saying, which Ibn Taymiyyah is much bigger than what they say, and even against what they are saying and the way they are translating it. So this is why we need a scholarly answer. This is why we need we should refuse the way our terminology. I was once in a program where somebody was telling me, you have to remove jihad. You can understand that you have some Muslims saying to the West, for example, we have to remove some verses of the Quran and some notions of Islam by saying these are words that are pushing the people towards extremism. So I think that we have to be, and in a research center, in a university, this is the starting point. Defining is the starting point of everything. Refusing, the average and superficial understanding. And it comes to what you were saying, for example, when it comes to what is happening in the West and what we are talking about. So for example, I don't accept the notion of radicalization. When it comes to what we have with the young people who are going, I'm saying I don't accept this word. Why? We had it in 2005. People thought that I was advising Tony Blair. No, I was there for 1.5 months. And I said, I'm ready to be part of the discussion with one condition. I speak my mind and I don't want money. And we were dealing with the state institutions. And they were talking about radicalization, and they were talking about radicals. We ended up talking about violent extremism. Why? Because when you say radicalization, in your mind, it means they knew their religion, and step by step, they went towards something which was extreme, which is not right. 92% of the people who are involved in attacks, for example, in Europe, or they are going to Syria, have not more than 6 months of practice. So are they radicalized so quickly? To the point that you heard about what happened in Nice, in France. The guy was not even connected to Islam the day before. So the French state said a very quick radicalization, overnight. Overnight. That's not religion. We have to be serious with this, because it means that they are completely disconnected. Completely disconnected. What happened in Tunisia, for example, the guy was high on cannabis. He was on drug. And 2 days before, he was on a party. Nothing to do with Islam. So we can't go from this to radicalization. We need to get it. What is happening in their mind? Who is playing behind the screen? Who is instrumentalizing this? By saying, as Muslims, as to what we know, we condemn the understanding of Islam, but don't tell us that it's all religious. There are many other things that are happening here for people who have nothing to do with religion, and they are manipulated. And this is why also what we have to say, that's not true. If you take all the religious texts, they are all open to interpretations that are potentially violent. What is happening today, yes, and we have to face this, is that we have some so-called scholars and people taking some verses and instrumentalizing them in a way which is unacceptable, but all our tradition is not. So what is important here is to say, look, don't essentialize Islam through the margins that you see today and forgetting thousands, millions of Muslims in their history who are not involved in this. So why is it that today we reduce this? So there is a wrong perspective here when it comes to this. So we need to add knowledge to perceptions. You know, Huntington was saying it's a clash of civilizations. Edward Said responded by saying it's a clash of ignorance. And I responded to both of them saying, I don't agree with both. I think it's a clash of perceptions. And perceptions is more dangerous than ignorance. because perception is something that you feel, but you don't understand. So it's half knowledge perception. And it's very dangerous because when you are half knowledgeable, you think that you know. It's much more, so I would say this. The last point about the Nusus al-Qur'aniyah, this is not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that we have to change the Nusus. النصوص وفهم النصوص فهم النصوص أولا النصوص واضحة ولغويا والقواعد ولكن السياق الواقع لابد أن نفهم هذا فهم النصوص يأتي كذلك من فهم السياق السياسي أنا هذا هو.
So we have to go back to the text to understand the text as it is and not only the text as it was understood in a certain context or reality. The text is the text.
I think it's important here, which is the text is the text, but there are always interpretation of the text based on the context. You cannot deny this. You cannot deny that the text is coming from the context. Even حتى يعني السياق يعني فهم السبب سبب أسباب النزول واضحة ولكن سبب
أسباب النزول, the causes for revelation are understood in the text. So I want to go back to this understanding, not to monopolize the text. I don't want that, but to understand the text and go back to the context of the understanding of the text.
Just a very short comment. I used to quote sometimes because I heard it from one professor, Islamic, Muslim, analyzing present situation. And he was saying that today there is an ummiya diniya, religious ignorance. And then I shared it once with a Muslim high-level authority meeting with him, and I mentioned this sentence to him, referring that this professor was talking about ummiya diniya, and then he told me, please, I think this is, you can understand, but it is better to say ummiya fi faham ad-din. Because this is what is happening today. There is a misinterpretation of the understanding of religion. People are to be educated. We have already said that many times, education. But as a matter of fact, the understanding of religious values and the understanding of the language, because in interreligious dialogue, for example, we speak of prayer, there are many nuances, there are many differences, there are many aspects, and it is not the same to speak about salat or to speak about dua, and the same for us Christian. So the language with which we speak, we talk, needs, Dr. Tariq Ramadan has said, and as you, Professor, has raised in your question, it is something very important. Because there is this misperception and a wrong and mistaken use that generalizes, and not everybody is ummi. There are many people of goodwill, and the grassroots you may find all the pious people who are surrendered to God and trying to live their faith the best way they can. This is to be respected and not manipulated as today sometimes happens.
Thank you very much. We really passed our allocated time, so we'll just take the final round of questions. 3 questions as they came in order. The gentleman, and then the gentleman, and then the last question here.
Hello, are you ready? Very good.
And if we can make the questions brief and the answers
it would be, inshallah.
Because 9:30 we have to leave.
Assalamu alaikum, and may Allah bless you, may God bless.
May the peace and blessings of God be upon you.
Very candid subject that has been addressed here, jihad. It's wonderful. My question is the following. It's a question and a comment. Right after 9/11, strategies have been put forward, policies to fight terrorism. However, after, I would say, 15 years, the problem has accelerated, has been amplified. Exponentially, the equation is becoming very, very problematic. Are the strategies that have been put during 9/11 are not working? Are we, may God forbid, going from one cell to two cells of jihadists, if there were there, to now nations that are jihadists? This is also complicated and amplified by the fact that I am an Algerian, and I witnessed the 1991 cancellation of the elections in Algeria because the elections brought the Islamic movement to power. And this has been done everywhere in the Muslim world, in Tunisia, in Egypt. So I think what's happening is very, very, very dangerous. It's where, if you ask me, I don't buy the Daesh perspective. But if you ask me honestly, I would say that people who are embracing it, it's not because they are ignorant, because they are transgressed and oppressed, because the new world order that we have generated after 9/11, plus the elections that are bringing Muslims to power, but they are rejected and reinforced by the Western friends, it's generating for us a Daesh. Or in other terms, we're generating Daesh, and may God forbid. I think it's a very, very dangerous situation that we are facing. If we're not going to take care sincerely and honestly and candidly of what's going on, I do believe that we're not going to generate Daesh. We're going to generate something more complex. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Gentleman in the front, yes. Here, miss. Here, can you raise your hand, please?
In the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful, we would like to thank Kyle for this very important occasion, but I have a small observation. We are in an Arab state, and the university is in the educational city, and we do welcome all languages to be translated and translated into. But I was hoping our Arab thinkers to speak in Arabic and to be translated into English. When I listen to the interpreters, I do not listen to the lecturers. And I hope that this is going to be taken into account in future events. The second thing, we live in the climax of conflicts. When we talk about an inter-civilizational dialogue, peaceful coexistence, interfaith dialogue, these are not related to the reality in which we live. These are drugs that are used by us. I would like to pose a question to the representative of the Vatican. So the homogeneous civilization is a Western civilization. And the representative of Christianity is the one whose word is heard in that civilization. So we talk here about Europe, Russia, and the United States of America. And I do not differentiate between these three components when it comes to the Christian tradition. And this is a reality. Has the Vatican done its duty in achieving coexistence between the different civilizations by bringing to the attention of those who represent Christianity that the methodology of aggression, of expelling the other, is the one that would lead to world peace? I would like only to say that we should look into what is taking place in Europe. Europe has gone back to the Middle Ages. Christianity should prevail and other religions should leave Europe. This is a backward, old view that is not accepted by any mind. So if the Vatican is to do something practical on the ground, they should take that into account. My second intervention or point is to Dr. Ramadan. We do talk about so many theories, and all what is being said is interesting, is wise, is very useful. But I would like to say we are facing two categories in the Islamic world. We have the category of rulers and the category of the people. And the rulers are the ones that are in control, are the ones that have the upper hand. Most Islamic and Arab rulers do not do anything for their own governments. They are living in a situation of defeat. And I do say that most of them are as I described. That is why I would like to tell Dr. Ramadan, we have no hope in these governments. On the contrary, they do help in the killing of the spirit of values. No justice, no dignity in the Arab and Islamic world. So what is the role of the people? The people are being killed, are being sent to prison. Those who are taken to the street, who have taken to the street, are sentenced to 17 years. Some others are sentenced to death because they have tried to criticize the sovereign entities. So that is why I would like to tell Dr. Ramadan, what are we supposed to do, we the people? We were supposed to leave this hall 2 minutes ago, so we're going to take only these questions, and we'd like to give the opportunity to the panelists to answer the questions. If any of you have some more questions, you can do that after the session.
I think that the reality of our world is very complex, and today there is also a need of intra dialogue among our communities, and in that context, as I mentioned to you before, the Vatican has his authority for the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church is considered as universal. So members of the Catholic Church is present worldwide. It is the largest community, but they are in the context of the different Christian communities, they are observers within the World Council of Churches, not to influence in number the work that is done for promoting this intra-dialogue among communities. Our problems in the West are not for the West, are for us all. And in the international forum, often Muslims and Christians, we are standing together in order to counter certain issues that are affecting our communities. For example, family that you have mentioned, there is this laicite, that is not laicite, it's laicism, this activism that is excluding in a very aggressive way the religious values in society. So there is ecology, there are many common values that are very important. But as a matter of fact, in the West today, there is an ongoing profound crisis of identity. And I think that this is affecting also globally our reactions for not corresponding to our ancient origins of the same continent, the European continent, of ancient values that then was accepted by the humanism, Les Lumières, to apply principles of Christianity from a lay perspective to bring good to humanity. But as you said, yes, I mean, there is an ongoing difficulty, but I think that beyond what is the territory of the continent, I think that it is a deterioration of what we are analyzing, legislation, ethics. There is a deterioration of ethical principles, al-akhlaq. People, they are abandoning. Children, they are not obeying their parents. Parents, they don't know how to educate their children. People, they don't want to respect law. People, they are abusing people. So there are many ways that are making humanity weak and is discouraging also many people, for they see how many values, we are losing many values. Wherever I go, I see people always complaining, what a pity, what is happening, what is going on. Now, from that context, I made the reference to 9/11 because there had been one event and that has marked. I don't enter into the contents. There have been many prior to this, and you have mentioned them, and it is true. But as a matter of fact today, about either be true or not, but it is a reference we made for saying that we as human beings belonging to different thaqafat, to different cultures, civilizations, and religions, we are facing a new challenge that demands beyond our frontiers to be true builders of bridges rather than constructing walls that divide human beings. Thank you.
Yes, there were two questions. The first one was about the war on terror and how we have to deal with it and what is happening. No, I agree with you. It's very dangerous. And, even in northern Mali once, the French foreign minister was saying once, we went to fight 9,000, and after 2 years there are 60,000. So in fact, if you wanted to keep it going and increasing, you wouldn't choose another policy. It's as if it's done to perpetuate an ongoing process. And in the way things are done, and in the way the people are settling, we have to be very serious about this and refuse, to be accused of conspiracy theory. We have to deal with it and say, okay, look, it's quite strange that wherever they settle down, these violent extremists, this is where there is geostrategic interests and resources. In Afghanistan, and this is where we know that there is gas and there is oil and there is lithium. In the northern Mali, we know now there is uranium, and they are settling exactly where we need them. So is there, or do we have to deal with people who have a distorted understanding of Islam? Yes, we cannot deny this. Are some people instrumentalized in the way they are pushed to do things? I'm convinced that yes, that there are people who are playing with them and playing with these radicals, as we call them, the violent extremists.
And we know even that some of, even it's now, we have books done about infiltrants, for example, in the United States, pushing the people. What they did for drugs, they are doing it for violence. And when you ask the FBI, why have you done that? They say, we wanted to check if they were potentially ready to do it. Thank you. So you take the people who are completely disenfranchised within the society, and many of them are completely disconnected of everything. You play with them, and then you say, oh, this is radicalization. This is. So we have to be clear that the war on terror, it's also playing for other interests, and it's instrumentalized in many ways, at many levels, by the way. And what we need to know is that it makes money. Transnational corporation and weapons and all this, they are making money with terror. So we need also to get this sense. So my position on this, it's really to take a decision, to take a position on what we know. Is there today, or are there today Muslims who are quoting the Quran, using Islam to kill innocent people? Yes, and we have to condemn. Are there things that we don't know? Yes. And we are ready, and we are right, and we have the right to question. We have the right to question these people who are completely silly in the way they are losing and keeping their identity card and putting things in Arabic when every training is done in English. We have the right to question. Who are these silly people who are so clever to do this and so silly to leave that? So we take a decision on what we know, and we question on what we don't know. And for example, about the fact that I questioned the fact that one guy, for example, in France, ended up being killed by 200 policemen around him. He was alone. Why do you kill him? We want him. We want to listen to what he has to say. How is it that all these people are killed all the time? So if somebody is saying, oh, you are leaning towards a conspiracy theory, I'm responding to those people and say, and you towards silly followers. Stupid followers of what this narrative is telling you. So we have the right to question when there are doubts. And this is why I'm asking independent inquiries in many of these things. Because I don't want also, and I'm not following the Muslims who are saying, we deny. The state of denial, it has nothing to do with Islam, is wrong. So there is an in-between, taking a position on what we know, questioning on what we don't know, and asking this war on terror at the end, who is taking advantage out of this? Today, after what we call the Arab Spring, and I remind you, I said it from the very beginning, I doubt the whole narrative. I doubt it. Because I was looking at the economic side of the whole equation by saying, we think it's political, it's deeper than that. A destabilized Middle East, it's very good for the people who are dealing with security. And the people who are dealing with security is not China. At the level of the Middle East, it's much more the United States coming back from security. So this is my position, but I think that we have to go further. السؤال عريض طويل عن دور الشعوب ده يحتاج إلى.
So when he talks about the role of the peoples, I think we need to have lectures on that particular issue. It
has been very interesting and enjoyable. And please join me in thanking our two distinguished keynote speakers. And thank you so much for coming. And we are looking forward to your participation tomorrow. The session tomorrow will start at 8:30. So see you then. And thank you so much.
So, Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen.
Assalamu alaikum.
First of all, I would like to thank our distinguished speakers tonight and the moderator also. And you are all welcome to join us in the refreshments outside this hall. And hopefully you will have a good night, inshallah, with being inspired by these talks. And we'll see you tomorrow, 8:30. We'll start 9 o'clock sharp. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.